A ruthless reporter tries to humiliate Clint Eastwood, unaware that Barron Trump is in the room. But when Barron speaks, his words shake the entire studio. Secrets are exposed, tensions explode, and a shocking truth about loyalty, sacrifice, and betrayal is revealed. What happens next will leave you speechless. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The atmosphere in the studio was electric, charged with an undercurrent of anticipation that bordered on the palpable. The polished mahogany table at the center gleamed under the intense glare of overhead lights, casting sharp reflections that danced with the tension in the room. Seated with an air of unassailable confidence was Clint Eastwood, the venerable actor and director whose storied career had become synonymous with American cinema itself. His chiseled features, etched by time and experience, remained impassive, a stoic mask that revealed nothing of the thoughts swirling behind his piercing gaze. Opposite him sat the ambitious journalist Vanessa Reed, a woman whose reputation for incisive interviews and unflinching exposés had made her both respected and feared in media circles. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, locked onto Eastwood with a predatory intensity, as if seeking out the chinks in the armor of the Hollywood titan before her. This was no ordinary interview. It was a high-stakes duel of wits, and the air crackled with the promise of confrontation. Standing just behind Eastwood was Barron Trump, now 19 and exuding a presence that belied his years. His towering stature was matched by an aura of quiet strength, his blue eyes observing the unfolding scene with a calm that suggested both awareness and readiness. Entrusted to Eastwood's mentorship by his father, the 47th President of the United States, Barron had spent years under the actor's tutelage, absorbing lessons not just of the craft, but of character and resilience. The interview commenced with a series of probing questions, each one a calculated attempt to unsettle the seasoned actor. Vanessa leaned in, her voice laced with a cold precision. "Mr. Eastwood, some critics argue that your era has passed, that your perspectives are relics of a bygone time. How do you respond to claims that you are clinging to a relevance that no longer exists?" A flicker of irritation flashed in Eastwood's eyes, but before he could articulate a response, Barron's voice cut through the charged silence. "Relevance isn't dictated by time but by impact," he stated, his tone measured yet imbued with a firmness that commanded attention. "Mr. Eastwood's contributions have shaped the very fabric of cinema and culture. Dismissing his influence as outdated overlooks the profound and ongoing effect of his work." Vanessa's composure wavered momentarily, clearly unprepared for Barron's interjection. She turned her gaze to him, eyebrows raised in a mixture of surprise and challenge. "I wasn't aware you would be participating in this discussion, Mr. Trump," she remarked, a hint of condescension threading through her words. "I'm here to support a man who has been both a mentor and a guardian," Barron replied, his voice unwavering. "When someone of his stature is subjected to unwarranted disrespect, it becomes necessary to speak out." Eastwood placed a reassuring hand on Barron's shoulder, a silent gesture of gratitude and restraint. "The young man has a point," he acknowledged, his gravelly voice breaking the mounting tension. "Let's focus on the substance of the matter, rather than chasing sensationalist narratives." Undeterred, Vanessa shifted her strategy, her gaze narrowing as she addressed Barron directly. "Your father's tenure in the White House has been one of the most divisive in recent history. What qualifies you to speak on matters of legacy and integrity?" A shadow passed over Barron's features, a blend of resolve and the weight of personal experience. "I've witnessed firsthand the complexities and challenges that come with leadership," he responded, his voice steady yet edged with emotion. "Integrity isn't proclaimed. It's demonstrated through actions and steadfastness, qualities that Mr. Eastwood embodies and has imparted to me." The room seemed to hold its breath, the intensity of the exchange drawing in everyone present. Vanessa, sensing the shift in dynamics, pressed on, her tone taking on a sharper edge. "There are allegations that you've leveraged your influence to shield the Trump family from scrutiny, Mr. Eastwood. How do you respond to such claims? Eastwood's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing as he met Vanessa's stare. Allegations are easy to make, especially in an age where rumor often masquerades as fact, he retorted, his voice carrying the weight of unspoken truths. My actions have always been guided by principle, not by the whims of public opinion. Vanessa's focus shifted back to Barron, her demeanor a mix of skepticism and curiosity. Living under the shadow of your father's presidency must be daunting. How do you navigate the perception that you're merely an extension of his identity? For the first time, a flicker of vulnerability crossed Barron's face, quickly replaced by a resolute calm. I am my own person, shaped by my experiences and the mentors who have guided me, he asserted, casting a respectful glance at Eastwood. Identity is forged through personal growth and the values we choose to uphold. The atmosphere in the studio was thick with unspoken tension, the interplay of questions and answers creating a tapestry of conflict and revelation. As the interview progressed, it became evident that this was more than a mere exchange of words. It was a battle for truth, respect, and the affirmation of one's legacy in the face of relentless scrutiny. In the heart of Washington, D.C., the atmosphere inside the White House was charged with anticipation. The press room, usually a place of controlled chaos, now buzzed with an undercurrent of tension. Reporters from every major network jostled for position, their murmurs blending into a cacophony of speculation. At the center of this maelstrom stood Barron Trump, the president's youngest son, his tall frame casting a commanding presence. Beside him, the legendary Clint Eastwood exuded a stoic calm, his chiseled features betraying no hint of the storm brewing around them. The press conference had been called unexpectedly, a response to a recent surge of media attacks targeting Eastwood's unwavering support of the Trump administration. Accusations ranged from claims of outdated ideologies to unfounded rumors about his personal life. Leading the charge was Jessica Reed, a journalist known for her incisive and often ruthless reporting. Her articles had painted Eastwood as a relic of a bygone era, questioning his relevance in today's progressive society. As the room settled, Jessica stood, her eyes sharp behind designer glasses. "Mr. Eastwood," she began, her voice slicing through the ambient noise, "many believe your continued association with the Trump family undermines your legacy. How do you respond to allegations that you're clinging to past glories?" Before Eastwood could speak, Barron stepped forward, his blue eyes flashing with determination. "Miss Reed," he said, his voice steady yet edged with emotion, "respect isn't dictated by the whims of public opinion. Clint Eastwood's legacy is built on decades of integrity and courage. To suggest otherwise is not only disrespectful, but profoundly ignorant." A hush fell over the room. Jessica, momentarily taken aback, quickly regained her composure. "Mr. Trump," she retorted, "some argue that your defense is merely a deflection from legitimate critiques. Can you provide concrete examples to support your claims?" Barron's jaw tightened. "When my father faced threats during his campaign, it was Clint who stood by our family, offering unwavering support and protection. He has been a mentor to me, teaching the values of honor and resilience. These aren't abstract concepts, they are lived experiences." The tension escalated as Jessica pressed on. "Mr. Eastwood, are you implying that your personal relationship with the Trump family justifies overlooking the divisive policies they've implemented?" Eastwood's gaze was unyielding. "Ms. Reed, my support is rooted in principles, not politics. It's about standing by those you believe in, even when it's not convenient. Loyalty and conviction aren't outdated, they're timeless." The room seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with unspoken challenges. Jessica's pen hovered over her notepad, her next question poised to strike. But before she could continue, Barron leaned in, his voice low but resonant. "Smith, Reed, perhaps it's easier to cast stones than to acknowledge the complexities of loyalty and friendship, but know this: attempts to tarnish a good man's name reveal more about the accuser than the accused." A palpable shift occurred in the room. Reporters exchanged glances, sensing the gravity of the confrontation. Jessica opened her mouth to respond, but found herself momentarily speechless, the weight of Barron's words hanging heavily in the charged silence. The atmosphere in the studio grew increasingly charged as the interview progressed. Vanessa Reed, sensing an opportunity to unearth a sensational story, leaned forward, her eyes narrowing with calculated intent. "Mr. Eastwood," she began, her voice adopting a sharper edge, "there are allegations that you've leveraged your influence to shield the Trump family from scrutiny. How do you respond to such claims?" Clint Eastwood's expression remained unyielding, his gaze steady as he met Vanessa's challenge head-on. "Miss Reed," he replied, his voice carrying the weight of unspoken truths, "allegations are easy to make, especially in an age where rumor often masquerades as fact. My actions have always been guided by principle, not by the whims of public opinion." Undeterred, Vanessa shifted her focus back to Barron Trump, her demeanor a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "Living under the shadow of your father's presidency must be daunting," she posited, her tone probing. "How do you navigate the perception that you're merely an extension of his identity?" For the first time, a flicker of vulnerability crossed Barron's face, quickly replaced by a resolute calm. "I am my own person," he asserted, his voice steady, "shaped by my experiences and the mentors who have guided me." He cast a respectful glance at Eastwood before continuing. "Identity is forged through personal growth and the values we choose to uphold." The tension in the room was palpable, the interplay of questions and answers creating a tapestry of conflict and revelation. Vanessa, sensing the shift in dynamics, pressed on, her tone taking on a more aggressive edge. "Mr. Eastwood," she challenged, "critics argue that your era has passed, that your perspectives are relics of a bygone time. How do you respond to claims that you are clinging to a relevance that no longer exists?" A flicker of irritation flashed in Eastwood's eyes, but before he could articulate a response, Barron's voice cut through the charged silence. "Relevance isn't dictated by time, but by impact," he stated, his tone measured, yet imbued with a firmness that commanded attention. "Mr. Eastwood's contributions have shaped the very fabric of cinema and culture. Dismissing his influence as outdated overlooks the profound and ongoing effect of his work." Vanessa's composure wavered momentarily, clearly unprepared for Barron's interjection. She turned her gaze to him, eyebrows raised in a mixture of surprise and challenge. "I wasn't aware you would be participating in this discussion, Mr. Trump," she remarked, a hint of condescension threading through her words. "I'm here to support a man who has been both a mentor and a guardian," Barron replied, his voice unwavering. "When someone of his stature is subjected to unwarranted disrespect, it becomes necessary to speak out." Eastwood placed a reassuring hand on Barron's shoulder, a silent gesture of gratitude and restraint. "The young man has a point," he acknowledged, his gravelly voice breaking the mounting tension. "Let's focus on the substance of the matter, rather than chasing sensationalist narratives." The room seemed to hold its breath, the intensity of the exchange drawing in everyone present. Vanessa, sensing the shift in dynamics, pressed on, her tone taking on a sharper edge. "There are allegations that you've leveraged your influence to shield the Trump family from scrutiny, Mr. Eastwood. How do you respond to such claims?" Eastwood's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing as he met Vanessa's stare. "Allegations are easy to make, especially in an age where rumor often masquerades as fact," he retorted, his voice carrying the weight of unspoken truths. "My actions have always been guided by principle, not by the whims of public opinion." Vanessa's focus shifted back to Barron, her demeanor a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "Living under the shadow of your father's presidency must be daunting. How do you navigate the perception that you're merely an extension of his identity?" For the first time, a flicker of vulnerability crossed Barron's face, quickly replaced by a resolute calm. "I am my own person, shaped by my experiences and the mentors who have guided me," he asserted, casting a respectful glance at Eastwood. "Identity is forged through personal growth and the values we choose to uphold." The atmosphere in the studio was thick with unspoken tension, the interplay of questions and answers creating a tapestry of conflict and revelation. As the interview progressed, it became evident that this was more than a mere exchange of words. It was a battle for truth, respect, and the affirmation of one's legacy in the face of relentless scrutiny. The air in the studio had shifted. What had started as an interview meant to discredit Clint Eastwood and challenge Barron Trump had turned into something entirely different, a battle of principles, integrity, and the weight of legacy. Vanessa Reed, sharp-eyed and relentless, wasn't one to back down, not when the world was watching, and certainly not when she sensed she was losing control of the narrative. The camera crews knew it, the producers in the control room knew it, and even the audience could feel it. The moment had turned from a simple exchange of words into something more, a confrontation that would be remembered for years to come. Vanessa, still clutching her notes, decided to take a risk. If direct attacks weren't breaking them, she would take a more insidious route, one that had brought down titans before. She slid a worn manila folder onto the table, its edges frayed from years of handling. The tension in the room thickened as all eyes followed the slow movement of her fingers as she tapped on the folder. "Mr. Eastwood," she began, her voice cool but layered with something sharper, something eager. "There are whispers, unanswered questions from your past, decisions that, if scrutinized, might suggest your so-called loyalty is less about honor and more about self-preservation." She let the words hang in the air like a storm cloud waiting to burst. Clint's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. His silence was neither weakness nor avoidance, but a seasoned patience, the kind of restraint that only a man who had faced countless battles could master. Vanessa saw this and pressed on. "You've stood by the Trump family through thick and thin, and yet some would argue that it wasn't just loyalty that kept you in their circle, but rather the skeletons in your own closet, skeletons that might not hold up under real scrutiny." Barron Trump, who had been silent for a moment, suddenly moved. Slowly, deliberately, he leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. The calculated intensity in his blue eyes sent a ripple of unease through Vanessa, though she tried not to show it. "You really think you can shake a man like Clint Eastwood?" Barron's voice was smooth but carried a weight that made it clear he wasn't posturing. He was done with the games. "You sit there, reaching for headlines, picking apart a man who has done more for this country in one lifetime than most people could ever dream of, and for what? Clicks? Ratings?" He exhaled, shaking his head slightly. "You dig up whispers, half-truths, because you think that if you throw enough dirt, something will stick. But you see, Vanessa?" Barron's voice lowered, making her lean in ever so slightly. "People like you forget that the truth doesn't crumble under pressure. Lies do." Vanessa blinked rapidly, clearly thrown by his intensity, but she wasn't about to let him regain control so easily. She opened the folder with deliberate slowness, revealing aged documents, some stamped confidential in bold red ink. "If you're so confident, Barron," she said, her voice taking on a venomous edge, "then why don't we let the world decide?" She lifted one of the papers, her eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of a journalist about to drop a bombshell. "Mr. Eastwood, in 2006, you were allegedly involved in a classified situation that resulted in—" "That's enough." Barron's voice cut through the air like a knife. It wasn't a yell, but the force behind it stopped Vanessa mid-sentence. It was the voice of someone who had reached the limit of his patience, someone who had seen people like her tear others apart under the guise of truth-seeking and refused to let it happen again. His hands were clenched into fists on the table, the muscles in his jaw tightening. The camera zoomed in, capturing the raw emotion etched onto his face. "You want to talk about past decisions?" Barron's voice was like steel, unwavering. "Fine. Let's talk about them. Let's talk about the times Clint Eastwood put his life on the line to protect not just me but my family. Let's talk about the moments that never made the headlines, the times he stood in front of danger when others would have run. Let's talk about loyalty, about standing for something even when it's hard." Vanessa hesitated, but Barron wasn't finished. "You came here looking for cracks, looking for a way to twist the narrative. But the truth is, Clint Eastwood doesn't owe you or anyone else an explanation for the life he's lived." Barron's voice dropped lower, carrying a weight that made every word hit its mark. He's earned his place in history. You're just trying to carve out yours by tearing down others. For the first time since the interview began, Vanessa looked uncertain. The confidence she had wielded like a weapon had been chipped away, and she knew it. Clint, who had remained silent, finally spoke, his voice carrying the wisdom of years. "You know, Ms. Reed," he said, his gravelly voice cutting through the silence, "in all my years, I've learned one thing about people like you." He leaned forward just enough for the cameras to capture the cold certainty in his eyes. "You don't really care about the truth. You care about the story you can sell. But the problem is, people aren't buying it anymore." A murmur rippled through the studio audience. Even some of Vanessa's own colleagues, watching from behind the scenes, shifted uncomfortably. She had walked into this expecting to be the one in control, but now she was trapped in the very corner she had tried to force Clint and Barron into. Barron stood up, his imposing frame making Vanessa seem smaller in comparison. "You came in here thinking you had the power," he said, his voice quieter now but no less powerful. "But power isn't in the questions you ask. It's in the truth that stands, even after all the lies fall away." The studio was silent. The weight of his words settled like a final blow. Vanessa, her face pale, looked down at her notes, but for the first time, she had nothing left to say. Barron turned to Clint, the respect in his eyes unmistakable. "I think we're done here," he said. Clint nodded, pushing his chair back and standing beside him. As they walked off the set together, the cameras still rolling, the world watching, it became clear this wasn't just an interview. It was a moment that would be remembered, a statement that no amount of spin or headlines could erase. Loyalty, integrity, strength, and above all, the truth. The fallout from the explosive interview was immediate and seismic. Within minutes of Barron Trump and Clint Eastwood walking off the set, social media erupted into a wildfire of reactions. Twitter, Facebook, and every major news network scrambled to dissect what had just unfolded. The headlines came rolling in at breakneck speed. Barron Trump destroys liberal host in defiant showdown. Clint Eastwood's unshakable loyalty stands firm against smear campaign. Vanessa Reed exposed, journalistic integrity in question. Clips of the interview flooded online platforms, amassing millions of views in record time. The world had just witnessed something that was more than a mere exchange of words. It was a reckoning. Clint Eastwood, the legendary Hollywood icon, had been targeted for humiliation, and Barron had stood by him without hesitation, delivering a defense so powerful it had left Vanessa Reed speechless. But the storm was far from over. Inside a dimly lit newsroom across the city, Vanessa sat in silence, her fingers trembling as they scrolled through the online carnage. Her carefully orchestrated attack on Clint had not just failed, it had backfired spectacularly. Her network executives were in a frenzy, their hushed conversations carrying a tone of damage control rather than celebration. She had expected to bring down a legend, to expose Barron as an unprepared, privileged shadow of his father. Instead, she had become the face of reckless journalism. "Vanessa!" a deep voice called from behind her. She turned sharply to see her boss, Richard Malone, standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He was one of the most feared media moguls in the industry, a man who lived for controversy but despised public humiliation, especially when it was his network suffering the blow. She cleared her throat. "I can fix this." Malone stepped closer, his eyes scanning the chaos on the multiple screens in the room. "No," he said, his voice low but filled with finality. "You've already lost." The words cut through her like a blade. "But I was just doing my job." Malone scoffed, shaking his head. "Your job? Your job was to control the narrative, not become the narrative. You underestimated them, Vanessa. You underestimated him." He turned toward one of the screens, replaying the moment when Barron had leaned forward, his words cutting sharper than a knife. Malone sighed, rubbing his temples. "Effective immediately, you're off the air." Her stomach dropped. "Wait, what?" You're firing me? He didn't even look at her. This isn't just about you anymore. You became a liability the moment you underestimated Barron Trump. He gestured toward the news headlines. You think I'm going to keep you on the air when every conservative outlet in the country is calling for your resignation? When even moderates are questioning whether you had any real evidence to back your accusations? Vanessa opened her mouth to argue, to defend herself, but nothing came out. The truth was undeniable. She had pushed too far, and now she was the one paying the price. Meanwhile, across town, Barron sat in the White House residence, scrolling through his own phone, watching as the world reacted to what had happened. Messages flooded in, some from close allies, others from complete strangers. Some were filled with praise, others with vitriol. He had expected as much. Clint Eastwood sat across from him, the soft hum of the TV in the background playing another news segment on the incident. "You all right, kid?" Clint asked, his gravelly voice breaking the silence. Barron exhaled, setting his phone down. "I knew they'd come after us, but I didn't think it would explode like this." Clint leaned back in his chair, his weathered face unreadable. "That's the thing about standing for something. You're always going to have people trying to knock you down." Barron nodded, deep in thought. "It's not over yet." Clint chuckled, shaking his head. "No, it's not. They're going to come at you harder now. They're going to spin this, twist it, try to make you look like the villain." He pointed toward the TV, where a new headline flashed. White House responds to Barron Trump's fiery defense of Clint Eastwood. Was it scripted? Barron clenched his jaw. "They can say whatever they want. I said what I needed to say." Clint studied him for a moment before nodding in approval. "Good, because if there's one thing I've learned in all my years, it's that the truth has a way of outlasting all the noise." Just then, Barron's phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. He hesitated before answering. "Hello?" A familiar voice came through the line. "Barron, it's Claire." Barron stiffened at the sound of Vanessa Reed's assistant, the woman who had been silently watching the interview from the sidelines. "What do you want?" Claire's voice was hesitant, but there was something different in her tone, something almost regretful. "I need to meet with you. There's something you need to know." Barron exchanged a glance with Clint, who raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "Why would I trust you?" Barron asked, his voice steady. Claire hesitated. "Because I was wrong, and I think Vanessa was being used." The word sent a chill down Barron's spine. Used? By who? Barron leaned forward. Claire took a deep breath. "Somewhere safe. Trust me, Barron. This is bigger than just an interview. You need to hear what I have to say." Barron hesitated for only a moment before making a decision. "Fine, but if this is a setup, you're going to regret it." Claire's voice was urgent now. "It's not. I'll send you the location. And Barron, bring Clint." As the call ended, Barron turned to Clint, a new fire in his eyes. "This isn't over," he said. Clint nodded. "No, kid, it's just getting started." The weight of Claire's words lingered in Barron's mind long after the call ended. Used. He had no reason to trust her. She had stood by Vanessa Reed's side while she tried to tear Clint apart. And yet, something about her voice, the way it trembled with urgency, told him that she wasn't playing a game. She was scared. And in Barron's experience, people only got scared when they knew something dangerous. Clint watched him carefully, his sharp eyes reading Barron's hesitation. "You're thinking about going, aren't you?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Barron sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't trust her, but if she has information on who's pulling the strings, I need to hear it." Clint leaned back in his chair, his face unreadable. "It could be a setup." Barron met his gaze. "I know." Clint studied him for a long moment, then smirked. "Well, kid, if you're going to do something reckless, you might as well bring an old man with you." A slow grin spread across Barron's face. "I was hoping you'd say that." They moved quickly, keeping the details of their meeting to themselves. If Claire was telling the truth, then whoever had used Vanessa Reed was still watching, still pulling the strings. The fewer people who knew about this meeting, the better. The location Claire sent was unusual, an old bookstore on the outskirts of D.C., the kind of place that was usually empty except for a few die-hard history buffs. It was the perfect spot for a quiet, unnoticed conversation. When they arrived, the bell above the door chimed softly, the air thick with the scent of old pages and dust. The shop was dimly lit, its wooden shelves towering like silent sentinels. In the back, near a small reading nook, Claire sat alone at a table, her fingers tapping anxiously against the surface. When she saw them enter, she visibly tensed. Barron and Clint approached cautiously, each assessing her. Claire was young, but the weight of something heavy clung to her shoulders. She looked as if she hadn't slept in days. "You came," she said softly. Barron crossed his arms. "You said you had something to tell me. Start talking." Claire swallowed hard and glanced around as if she expected someone to be lurking in the shadows. "Vanessa wasn't acting alone," she said. She thought she was just going after Clint, but she didn't realize she was being fed a narrative. Clint raised an eyebrow. Fed by who? Claire hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table. Barron opened it, his eyes scanning the documents. It was a collection of internal emails, correspondence between high-level media executives and shadowy political operatives. Barron's stomach tightened. He recognized some of the names. Powerful figures known for manipulating public perception, for orchestrating smear campaigns. But there was one name that stood out above the rest, one that made his blood run cold. John Prescott, the CEO of one of the largest media conglomerates in the country, a man with deep political ties and an agenda that had long been whispered about in Washington's darkest corners, a man who had everything to gain from tarnishing the Trump legacy. Barron clenched his jaw. "You're telling me this whole thing was orchestrated by Prescott?" Claire nodded. He saw Vanessa as a useful pawn. She thought she was just doing her job, but he was feeding her questions, controlling the angle. The goal was never just to discredit Clint, it was to discredit you, to make you look like an entitled kid defending an outdated icon. Clint let out a low whistle. "And I suppose Prescott had a backup plan in case Vanessa failed?" Claire's face darkened. Worse. If the interview had gone their way, they planned to release a secondary story, a fabricated scandal, something to destroy Clint's reputation completely. They were going to link him to political corruption, twist past decisions he made, make it look like he had been covering for your father all along. Barron's hands curled into fists. This wasn't just about Clint or even his father. This was about power, about a media empire controlling the truth, deciding what the public should believe. And Prescott was at the center of it. Clint leaned forward, his voice gravelly but deadly serious. "Why are you telling us this now?" Claire looked down, shame flickering in her eyes. "Because I was part of it. I didn't know the full extent, but I was supposed to keep an eye on Vanessa, make sure she stuck to the script. At first I thought it was just politics, just another story, but then I saw how they were willing to destroy an innocent man for no reason other than power. And when Barron stood up to her, when he refused to back down, I realized I was on the wrong side." Barron studied her, looking for any sign of deception. He wanted to be furious, wanted to call her a coward for waiting until now to come forward. But the fear in her eyes was real. She had betrayed powerful people by coming here, and that meant she was in danger too. "Prescott won't let this slide," Barron said. "If he knows you're talking to us, he'll come after you." Claire nodded. "I know. That's why I need your help." Barron exchanged a glance with Clint. This was bigger than an interview, bigger than a media smear campaign. They were up against an empire built on deception, a machine designed to manipulate the American people, and now they had a choice: walk away and let Prescott control the narrative, or fight back and expose the truth. Barron straightened, his resolve hardening. "Then we take this public." Claire's eyes widened. "You can't just—" "Yes, I can," Barron interrupted. "People deserve to know what's happening. Prescott thinks he can control the truth, but he doesn't control me." Clint chuckled, shaking his head. Kid, you've got more guts than most men I've known. Barron's eyes burned with determination. It's not just about me. It's about stopping this before it gets worse. Claire exhaled, her shoulders sagging with relief. Then I'll help in any way I can. Barron extended a hand, and after a moment of hesitation, Claire shook it. Clint stood, adjusting his jacket. Well then, he said with a smirk, let's go rattle some cages. As they left the bookstore, Barron knew they were stepping into dangerous territory. Prescott had spent years perfecting his grip on the media. Exposing him wouldn't be easy. But Barron Trump wasn't afraid of a fight, and this time, he was taking the truth straight to the American people. The battle lines were drawn, and there was no turning back. Barron Trump knew that once he stepped into the public arena with this information, the media machine, led by John Prescott, would retaliate with everything they had. But he wasn't afraid. This was bigger than him, bigger than Clint, bigger than his family. It was about the truth, something too many powerful people had tried to manipulate for too long. Sitting in the dimly lit war room of the Trump family estate, Barron, Clint Eastwood, and Claire Reynolds pored over the evidence in front of them. The classified emails, the bank transactions, the internal memos, all pointing to the same corrupt web spun by Prescott and his allies. The question wasn't whether they had enough proof. It was how to release it in a way that couldn't be buried or twisted. We need a platform that's untouchable, Clint said, his voice rough with experience. You put this in the wrong hands, and they'll twist it into another scandal. Barron nodded. We go direct. No intermediaries, no networks that Prescott can control. We release it ourselves. Claire, still looking shaken but determined, leaned forward. Social media is a weapon as much as it is a tool. If we handle this right, we can make it go viral before they have time to counterattack. Barron smirked. And if we make it personal, even better. Clint raised an eyebrow. Kid, this is already personal. Barron took a deep breath. He knew the risks, knew what it meant to go head-to-head with a media giant who had ruined careers, manipulated elections, and buried scandals for decades. But this wasn't just about playing defense anymore. This was about striking first. Tomorrow morning, Barron announced, standing up. We go live. The next day, the world woke up to something they had never seen before. A direct broadcast, raw and unfiltered, streamed from Barron Trump's official account. There were no flashy news anchors, no pre-packaged segments designed for ratings. Just him, standing in front of an American flag, his expression grave. My name is Barron Trump, he began, his voice steady but filled with unmistakable conviction. And today, I'm going to show you the truth the media doesn't want you to see. With that, the screen cut to the file's real, undeniable evidence of a coordinated effort to destroy not only Clint Eastwood, but the integrity of free press itself. Emails flashed across the screen, exposing how John Prescott's media empire had worked behind the scenes to silence dissenting voices, manipulate narratives, and fabricate stories against those who threatened their grip on power. Claire had worked through the night to compile a bulletproof presentation, breaking it down in simple, digestible terms so the public could understand the weight of the deception. Barron continued, his voice unwavering. For years, we've been told what to believe. We've been told that certain people are heroes and others are villains. But what happens when those who claim to protect the truth are the ones distorting it? What happens when a man like Clint Eastwood, who has spent his life standing for American values, is turned into a target for nothing more than refusing to bow to the establishment? The video cut to Clint, his steely gaze locked on the camera. I've been in this country a long time, he said simply. Long enough to know the difference between a mistake and a smear job. What they tried to do to me, what they've done to countless others. It ain't about truth, it's about control. And then came the final blow, the revelation that this was never just about Clint, but a larger campaign to destroy Barron himself. Emails from Prescott's executives detailed strategies to label him as a privileged, reckless kid, unworthy of his father's legacy. Some messages even suggested planting false scandals to create a media storm so overwhelming that his credibility would never recover. Barron's jaw tightened as he addressed the audience one last time. They thought they could silence me. They thought they could use my last name against me. But here's what they didn't count on. I don't play by their rules. The broadcast ended, but the firestorm was just beginning. Within minutes, social media exploded. The hashtags Expose Prescott and Stand with Clint trended worldwide. People from every walk of life, from political commentators to Hollywood figures, weighed in on the shocking revelations. Some called for immediate investigations into Prescott's media empire, while others demanded resignations from executives involved in the smear campaign. The reaction was bigger than even Barron had anticipated. Networks that had once scoffed at him were now forced to cover the story. Even Prescott's own channels were struggling to contain the fallout. His allies scrambled to discredit the evidence, but it was too late. The floodgates had opened. At the Prescott media headquarters, chaos reigned. The CEO himself, a man who had built his fortune on controlling narratives, was now watching the one thing he had never expected: his own empire unraveling before his eyes. "We need damage control," one of his executives stammered. "We need to go on the offensive." Prescott, usually cold and composed, slammed his fist against the desk. "We were already on the offensive, and we lost." As the sun set over Washington, Barron Trump stood with Clint Eastwood on the balcony of the family estate, looking over the city that had tried to tear them down. "They'll come for you next," Clint murmured. "You know that, right?" Barron nodded, a quiet fire in his eyes. "Let them try." This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time, the power of the media elites had been shaken to its core, and Barron Trump had proven that even the most powerful can be held accountable when the truth is finally set free. The world was still reeling. The broadcast had shattered the illusion of media invulnerability, and for the first time, those who had built their careers on deception were scrambling to stay afloat. But Barron Trump wasn't celebrating. Not yet. He knew the battle wasn't over. Sitting in the war room of the Trump estate, he watched as the fallout unfolded across every major network. Some were frantically spinning the story, trying to salvage Prescott's reputation with half-hearted denials and weak counterclaims. Others, however, were unable to ignore the weight of the evidence. The leaks had become too vast, too damning. Clint Eastwood stood beside him, arms crossed, his face unreadable. "They'll fight back harder now," he muttered. "Men like Prescott don't take a beating and just walk away." Barron didn't flinch. "I know," he said. "That's why we hit first." Claire Reynolds entered the room, her phone in her hand, her face pale. "It's happening," she said, swallowing hard. "Prescott's people are making their move." She tossed her phone onto the table, and the screen lit up with a live news report. Prescott himself had finally broken his silence, appearing in a carefully orchestrated press conference. The man who had spent years manipulating the truth now stood at the podium, visibly shaken, but still clinging to control. "This so-called expose is nothing more than a calculated attack," Prescott declared, his voice steady despite the storm raging around him. "A smear campaign orchestrated by a desperate political dynasty trying to silence free press. The so-called evidence they presented is misleading at best, fabricated at worst." Barron clenched his jaw. "He's going to try and turn this into an attack on me," he muttered. "Make it seem like I'm the one abusing power." Clint let out a dry chuckle. "They always do." Then Prescott played his last card. "I have in my possession damning evidence of my own," he continued, his expression darkening. "Evidence that will prove once and for all that Barron Trump and his family are not the innocent victims they claim to be." Claire gasped. "He's bluffing!" Barron narrowed his eyes. "Maybe, maybe not." Prescott's lips curled into a knowing smirk as he delivered the final words of his speech. "You wanted a war, Barron? You've got one." The screen cut to black. The message was clear. Prescott wasn't going down without dragging Barron into the fire with him. The room was silent, tension thick in the air. Clint exhaled slowly. "Well, kid," he said, turning to Barron, "you've rattled the right cages. Now let's see if you're ready for the fight of your life." Barron straightened, his blue eyes burning with resolve. Bring it on. This wasn't just a media battle anymore. This was a war for the truth. And Barron Trump was ready to fight until the very end. This story is more than just a battle between truth and deception. It is a reflection of the world we live in today. In an era where the media shapes narratives and influences minds, it is crucial to question, to seek truth, and to stand firm against manipulation. Barron Trump's courage and Clint Eastwood's unwavering loyalty remind us that integrity is not about popularity, but about doing what is right, even when the odds are stacked against you. Now, more than ever, we need voices that refuse to be silenced, individuals who dare to challenge the establishment and expose corruption. If this story inspired you, if you believe in standing for the truth, don't let it stop here. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this message with others. Together, we can ensure that stories like this reach those who need to hear them most. The fight for truth starts with you.